Welcome to Green Carpet Interviews. Let's get into the show.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Green Carpet Interviews. This is the show where we talk about all things green. Not just like, the color green of Apple and, crayons, but, sustainable living, environment, veganism, plant-based eating, living a more holistic, healthier lifestyle is what we're talking about. And we're mostly talking about on this episode um our interview with Sabs Katz that we did last week. Um it was a good interview, brought up a lot of different topics about um intersectional environmentalism, holistic lifestyles, and um we didn't really touch a lot about veganism on that in that interview, but we talked a lot about intersectionality. And so, sort of, what do you remember most about that conversation?
No, I like the idea, and I think the the concept of low waste. I like
Mhm.
that because I like either word combinations or phrases that really help bring a lot more together, that we can use this for many different areas of what we're doing. We can use it in business, we can use it at home, whatever that we're doing, that
Mhm.
low waste, just a concept of low waste.
Yeah.
For example, the idea of taking a walk rather than driving, for example, is low waste if it's not necessary, and just different things that way. I really like that part of it. And like I said, in our dialogue with her, the fact that for Sabbath, um, to be able to have that low waste Sabbath moment, you know, and I'd like to be able to incorporate that into my life more, where I'm really more deliberately going to low waste Shabbos, where we pause. The good thing about actually low waste is that we actually buy back our time. And that's what I like about
How
that.
how so?
And so, for example, when we are buying, or where we're consuming excessively, what happens is it takes more of our time to do that excessive consumption. Our bodies need, or our minds or our environment needs to rebalance again. It takes a little bit more time to rebalance itself because of the excess consumption, things that's not needed. We have to make more space for it, either physically in our bodies to make more space for the excess consumption, or make more psychological disturbance in our minds for the excess information, excess consumption of information that comes in. Or we have to now buy more space, a living space, because of the excessive consumption, that we need to now expand that space out and get into more debt, for example. So I think low waste really creates more space for us, so that we don't have to worry. uh, We don't have to unnecessarily worry about what's not important. We
Mhm.
can just focus on here, what we need to do. And I think that's really important. We often forget that the real wealth that we have as individuals is a wealth of our own good health, the wealth of our own healthy mind, the wealth of our own self. And I think low waste consumption from the outside of us means we regain more of ourselves, and so that's kind of what I mean by that. I think
Mm.
there's something to that I'd like to really talk more about, and maybe even write about, and see if that could really be another way to really help get that message of you know uh, keeping the environment healthy, or our minds, our bodies healthy. Maybe there's something that we can do that people can easily get and
Mhm.
understand and say, oh yeah, that works for me as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's nice. That's very good. Um I feel like one of the things that I remember about that conversation was, um, how contributions from different people may not be as easily done, you know?
Mm,
So, you know, um, and sort of like if we're getting to a point where we are, um, like if we want to make some sort of contribution towards the environment, we have to sort of come at it from our our point of view and
mhm,
our ability, um and not necessarily, try to shame other people for not being able to do it to a particular standard or not, depending on their situation, so if you are in a low income household and you can't afford, this high end, low waste, super organic, product because of just, the physical location of your nearest store, or, your financial, obligations outside, and, you know, the amount of money that's coming in. If you can't afford that, then, you can still contribute in another way,
mm,
and that's good. If you're I think the effort and the conscientiousness around those decisions is almost more important than your ability, at the moment, because your ability can
mm,
change, uh, in both directions. It can become better, or it can become worse. And, but the conscientiousness around those decisions should, I think, continuously be increasing, you know,
mm.
because it can increase. So,
I like that. Although it's interesting, I think when it comes to what was I going to say? Um, um, I was going to say when it comes to being able to afford, low waste. I think we can afford low waste because we're already over consuming. So, for example, if we're over consuming and it's costing us 100, whatever the unit is, 100 units of whatever
mhm,
that is, but what we really need, you know, would cost us $60 or 60 units of whatever the
mhm,
funds is, then whatever 100 that we're spending, we can then feed it into the 60 for what we actually need. So the products that we need for perhaps because the idea of that being expensive. So in other words, if we're over consuming already, we're already spending beyond what we need. So, and if we're spending 100, but we think, oh, what we really need is going to cost me 100, we just switch over onto what we need rather than,
mm,
the consuming what we want. We may which may be high waste. So
yeah,
if we go to low waste items, they're more expensive, for example, because it takes a little bit more. Uh, we have to pay more wages. You have to, all the
mhm,
things that we are doing because it's
mhm,
more fair trade.
yeah,
So therefore, it'll be a little bit more expensive. But because we are already over consuming low waste items anyway,
mhm,
we're just literally switching most of what we're spending onto the low waste, more needed things. So I
yeah,
think the differential between what we're spending now and what we would spend if we go into more low waste, and more conscious way of living, I I think it might be inconsequential, but we don't know.
yeah.
I we'd have to get the numbers. So
Right, right. I think that that can be true depending on, uh if you are, let's say eating in excess or whatever, right?
right.
You don't need to eat as much, or, you know, or you are, you know, I don't know. I think the definition of excess is different to different people, right?
Sure, 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 sure.
And so what I was kind of thinking is that, you on some level you are I think that there needs to be a little bit more education um around the differences between what low waste and not low waste is. So kind of going back a little bit. So I think that, like, as an example, you are a family, that is, you know, able to afford uh the Costco size whatever. Let's say ready-made meals, and that Costco size ready-made meals, out of all of those things, out of all those meals, you have to throw away maybe a couple of them because, you bought too many. You can't eat all of them. You got to throw away a few of them. Um, in that scenario, you're thinking that you're buying more of a bargain because, the cost per unit is down, but and but the thing is with that is, the cost per unit's down, sure, but like the waste per unit is high because, it's individual packages that you're taking. You have to throw those things away. You also have to throw away some of the additional meals because, you know, it's just you didn't you there was too much, right? You couldn't even eat it all. And so you had to waste it because of that. So I think, and then also within there, it's pre-packaged. So there's extra things in there to keep it lasting longer. Um, and so there, the environmental impact from that stuff, there may be more chemicals in it. So, it just, these meals are probably not the best for you
Right.
long term. But if you, and this feels like the best option, right? But if you were to educate yourself and say, hey, you know what, like maybe you can buy buy the bulk of the beans and the bulk of the vegetables and fruits and stuff like that, and then you can make your own meals, the same amount of meals, less price and less waste because you're putting them into your, glass containers, and you're meal prepping for, the weeks or whatever, right? And you don't have to use it all at once. And so you can you can ingest less because you have the control over it. You're buying less, you're spending less money because you're doing the bulk type of purchases, and you're also producing less waste because there are not the individual packages you're throwing away at the end of it, plus the
Mhm.
additional meals you're throwing away.
Right.
And the ingredients are more fresh, or you're having to assemble them yourself, which means that there is not the
Right.
preservatives and all those things like that. So I think
Right.
in some level there is like the idea that if you were to be educated a little bit more on these things, then you could in fact reduce your waste because of that education, whereas before you thought that the other idea was the best option because of your circumstances and your situation.
Yeah.
And and I think that on some level, that could be, you could say that, having a ready-made vegan meal is not as good as, preparing it yourself, but you also lose time when you're preparing it yourself. It takes a lot of time to, cook the beans and do all these things together, as opposed to, like, popping that ready-made meal into the microwave, you know, and then throwing the package away at the end of it. So yeah, I feel like there's multiple ways to look at it, and I think that the overconsumption is one element of it, and I think that we probably all overconsume in some way or another. So limiting those elements is probably best. But then there's also ways that we can not just limit that, but then also change the perspective of how we're looking at the problem to then reduce the waste. It's like sort of optimization, right? As opposed to
Right. Exactly.
reduction.
Hmm.
So we have to
Yeah.
probably reduce because you don't
Yeah.
need as much, but then also
Yeah.
optimize the
Yeah.
way that we do it. So
Although it's interesting because I think, for example, like because I remember growing up, you know, and and in Lagos at that time in Nigeria, you
Hmm.
know, we bought bulk stuff all the time. You go into
Yeah.
the market, even now they still buy bulk in the market,
Hmm.
they prefer it. You know, you go to the market and you have the big, huge baskets of the peppers or huge baskets of the onions and, or
Hmm.
the greens. It's just, you're just picking up and say, I want this much. They put it on their way, and
Yeah.
that's what you do. There's no packaging, nothing, none of that at all,
Hmm.
and you bring your own bag that's
Yeah.
folded up into your own purse or whatever you have. You undo it, or you even bring your basket. You may have a basket and you put all that stuff in and take it home. you know and I think there's something about doing your own cooking and so on. And the other thing also is that when you talk about going out, um, like in Yoruba culture, there are three ways that they build community. I think we've talked about that before. One is a spiritual system, where you have the temple. That's where you have the healing, the herbalist. Usually the herbalist or the medicine person is usually a priest, or priestess. That's actually that way they have some spiritual backing,
Mm.
that gives them some caution when they're actually administering herbs to their clients.
Mm.
That way, that way they're measured in their head, in their mind, in their psyche, when they're doing this work.
Mm.
So, and also the seat of education, the spiritual temple. uh, and that's also where we pass down, traditions from one generation to the next. And then the second uh, branch, of community building is the King's Palace, which is the seat of government. And then the third is the market.
Hmm.
And the market is usually headed by women, because only women actually, in general, women are the business owners in the market.
Hmm.
And because Yoruba culture is in the rainforest, so the men generally go to do their smithing, hunting, and so on in the forest. They do the weaving and bring everything back home.
Hmm.
And then they bring it back home, and the women then take those things to the market to sell in the market. So the women's
Hmm.
actually open the stalls or open the shops,
Right.
in the market. And so that's the reason why then you also have the secretary, the old, or the market leader
Hmm.
is usually a woman. And it's an honored title. And so women
Yeah.
actually are the ones that actually own businesses
Mm.
in Yoruba culture. But I say this only to say that the idea of packaging or all that stuff is unnecessary, because you're supposed to go into the market as a social part of culture. you
Mm.
know so you're not supposed to live alone. So you go out into the world, and the world is considered a market. So when you're on the streets, where you're in town, where you're in the actual physical market, it's all called market
Hmm.
in Yoruba culture. And it's supposed to be public space. you know
Hmm.
and so women really have a lot of influence in public space in this way. And so you're walking back and forth, and you're exercising, you're doing whatever you're doing, and then you stop at the market
Hmm.
and get your stuff for the day, and then you go back home.
Hmm.
So they're often going to the market every day or every other day to
Hmm.
get all this fresh ingredients. So I think there are ways, and you can see the low waste when people actually are walking to the market from their homes and going back and forth.
Hmm.
Of course, clearly, in the olden days, when there are no cars or anything like that, most people are just walking. you know
Yeah. Right.
so it's real true low waste.
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know so how do we balance that old way of real true low waste to the modern day of
Hmm.
low waste, where we're in far distances and far flung areas,
Hmm.
to one another, and stuff. So how do we handle that?
Yeah. I mean, it's an important question. because um we're the environment's only becoming more and more cluttered with um things, just stuff,
Right.
that's it's interesting, the this is just a random uh thought, but as humans we're sort of like we're pulling things out of the surface of the earth to then just like put them on top of the surface of the earth,
Wow,
where it's like
I love that.
we're just
That's a great analogy.
you
I
know
like that.
but then the top of the earth just keeps getting full of all the things that were once inside the earth.
Hmm.
Makes any sense.
Yeah,
Because
it
like
is a
all
little
the
strange.
all of the the garbage piles that are super super tall, it's plastics, it's
Totally.
glass, metal, all these different things that once were inside the earth, like within the crust or wherever,
Right, right,
we
right,
dug it up, made it into something else, and then put it on top, you know.
right, right.
Um, and the idea of like being able to break it down to then put it back into the earth, just takes such a
Yeah,
long time.
totally.
You've chemically changed a lot of the things that have come out to stay in that form for thousands of years, potentially, um and then it sort of like harms the life that's living on the surface of the earth
Mm,
too,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like all the microplastics that will
Yeah,
probably kill a lot of life inside of the ocean, right?
totally. Yeah, yeah,
um and I think
yeah.
that it's interesting, the it's an ecosystem, right? Everything is an
Yeah,
ecosystem that like
I like the way you brought that up. Yeah, it's so profound what we're doing, you
mhm,
know, to go down in the earth and just dig it all up. I mean, and I can understand the fact that we need shelter,
mhm,
even need clothing, and stuff because we need shelter beyond the stable shelter of a house, for example. When we go outside, into this marketplace or into this public space, into the environment
mhm,
that we're sheltered some. So I can understand the need for clothing. I can get that. I can even understand the need to learn about our world, so that
mhm,
we know how to help ourselves when we have diseases or something like that. I can understand that. But I
mhm,
think part of that overconsumption is the fact that we're digging too much, we're digging much more than we need,
mhm.
and we need to be resolved. The moment we start digging, and there's a point that we say, you know what, we should not be digging any more of this particular thing. Is not necessary. We should
Yeah.
figure out what's the next solution that will be more low waste or
I-
lower waste than this particular thing that we're doing, so we can then leave this to rest,
yeah.
and stop, and then move up until we get to a point where we really have a true low waste,
Mhm.
that we're using. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
It's so
Of things that we're using, sorry.
I'm just thinking about like how I'm just thinking here, but like I feel like capitalism in some
Mm-hmm,
way helps us to dig more things up than we need, because I'm just thinking like you know you have an idea of something, you need resources because you think that idea will sell something,
mm-hmm,
and so you create a helmet, right? A
mm-hmm,
helmet for bikes
mm-hmm,
that are
mm-hmm.
going to be the best helmet that and you hope that someone is going to buy this helmet,
Yeah.
and if they buy it or they don't, there is going to be a helmet that's going to go into the garbage, right? So if they bought the helmet, their old helmet will go in the garbage. If
Yeah,
they don't buy it, then this helmet that they didn't buy will go in the garbage
that's right.
because it's got to go somewhere, right? So
That's right.
um or they buy it, they have got two helmets and they don't use it, and it's taking up clutter and it's making clutter in their house, and now they've just got stuff everywhere, and then they have to just purge everything, all at once. And the random things that are in their garage that once had, like, there was a matching set, and it would have been created, it would have been thought of as being valuable, is now mismatched and is now no longer valuable, so it's going to get thrown away. um but the reason for that is because of opportunity. you know
Mhm.
a person, as a person, you feel like, okay, well, I've there's an opportunity here to create wealth for myself, or create, generate income for myself by having an idea. And so, because because that's an opportunity that is, like, that's available to you because of capitalism, you will then create things that may or may not be worth creating. So,
Isn't yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is interesting, and I think there's definitely some truth to the fact that capitalism does that. But although I think capitalism comes out of, you know, what we are needing as a collective,
Mhm,
what we are leaning towards as a collective. We're moving in a particular direction. All
mhm,
our energies and efforts are moved in a particular direction,
mhm,
and it causes a system to form. For example, there are times that capitalism is softer, there are times that it's harder.
mhm,
So when it's softer, the softness of capitalism is only it only comes about by the direction of the majority of people within that system.
mhm,
So if they lean a particular way, the capitalism may be softer, it may be harder, it depends. So I'm not quite sure if capitalism itself is a problem,
mhm,
or what we are needing, and what we are needing, and the way we are thinking, or the way we are believing, is by itself affected by some fundamental stories that we tell about ourselves, about our own culture. So for example, and this is not to bash any particular religion, but I think sometimes a worldview, a religious worldview, because religion often carries the heavy weight of the unfalsifiable God, for example. So it
mhm,
says, this unfalsifiable, undeniable, there's nothing you can do, you can't say it doesn't exist. This unfalsifiable God is told us to behave in this way. And so once we have it, codified, then it shapes our belief. And then that belief shapes the things that we're going to be doing in the world, that basically shapes the way our economy moves within that
mhm.
environment. So I think we're being underguarded by some beliefs that's shaping the way we are, that's forcing us to be in. We almost have to stop to say, let's question our own beliefs.
Well, I guess, well, in that, what would be an example of that?
And so, for example, like some religion actually teaches us, for example, like if I look at African spiritual systems,
Okay.
African spiritual system is often very grounded, it's earth-based. So, it's asking you to go into the forest. It's asking you to do, you're earth-based,
Mhm,
and spirit is imbued into physical things like material. So it's not just the God concept. For example, there's a lot of God concept that they actually have, but there's an understanding that there's not much you can do with that God concept, even
mhm,
though the belief is that there's a God concept that
mhm,
is maybe perhaps sending us some information. And in Yoruba theology, for example, where divination is the way that they believe that they're getting message from this. But the message that they're getting is actually not a different message than than the message that they got 100 years ago or 500 years ago, because they built in this divination system that already has all the verses and all the theological verses and wisdom
mhm,
teachings already in them. So when they cast any divination, it just They catch whatever divination that they actually catch. There's already a written system on it. So essentially, they're just saying that we really don't know what this God wants, but we've written all the possibilities of the information that we think this God is going to want for us as a culture. And so when we cast this divination, whatever divination we randomly select, then we read the corresponding verses of the mythos, and then the wisdom teaching. So it's no longer anything new, essentially. So whoever these Yorubas were, the onset that created this whole system, realized they may not be able to actually have that direct communication with this God anyway. But the point I'm making is that, yes, although they have this monotheistic concept of this one God, the reason why they have all of this other spiritual, the animism, for example, where they imbue spirit into forces and into material things, is the only way that they can actually bring this element of holiness into things, and so, and once they carve this in stone in their thinking, that they have this holiness in things, then it causes them to behave towards those things in a different way. Now let's go to Christianity. When Christianity came about, for example, and this is not a bashing at all, even though I have a concern about some aspects of it, but the point I'm making here is that now we're looking to God, where in Yoruba system, we can look to God, but we don't know what God really wants. But in Christianity, we know what God wants, and often you have people that actually have this revealed to them, even in modern times, that's still affecting the way that they are reacting within the community. Now, by looking up, what it also asks us is only look to God as an individual. So it's about your own individual salvation, that you're looking at for yourself. So there's an individual element. There's a separation of people, that we're separated from one another because we're literally trying to get our own salvation to heaven. So there's an individualism that comes from this. And I think that individualism, especially if you look in the West, where the West is the most capitalistic of all nations, and also the West is highly affected by Christianity. It's shaped by Christianity. And so that individualism comes from the belief system that we actually hold in the West, that causes us to actually have a system like capitalism that actually only survives with individuals, with individualism that undergirds it. So that's the reason why I'm saying that the belief that we actually have shapes that community, that shapes the way that we see our economic future. And then we're essentially, there's an inherent design towards capitalism that's within Christianity itself, in a way.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean.
Yes. And I guess, so how does that, because we were talking a bit before about, that capitalism helps to promote waste. And so if our, following the theory that you've proposed, if it is that, our society and the things that we believe sort of enable capitalism, and then potentially capitalism does cause excess of waste based on, the idea that, capitalism creates opportunity and people want the opportunity. So then they create things to then try to sell to other people, which creates waste, then I guess I guess how is it going to be fixed? I mean, if does it then, like what's
Yeah,
the
I think one of the
thought
things
behind it?
also, and the reason why capitalism will propagate more is that our beliefs in being so individual, for example, because we're only trying for each our own individual salvation to heaven. Our belief in this way means that we are separated, and the more that we're separated as individuals, we know less of each other, and that means that each one of us needs to survive, and so we're going to have to survive within a system of excess. For example, there's no reason why a family with 2 kids should have a home of 5 rooms. Not necessary. That's excess. And so that's what this individualistic society would do to us. So even when a couple have 2 cars, that's also excess. So when you look at it, whichever way we slice it, this individualism, kind of pushes us into excess. And that excess means that we're going to have to buy more, where we could, for example, we could use maybe 5 cars between 15 people, for example. Each one just says, I'm on the calendar, I'm going to take it on this day, and you take it on that day. And we just kind of divide it all up, to make it more low waste. But because we are individualistic in our society, we don't know one another well. And since I don't know you, I'd rather not be near you. So I don't quite like you the same way. And generation after generation of this individualistic thinking, then we have more enmity. We are more separated. We are more divided. We are competing more because now I've got to compete. I've got to look better than you do, because now we're used to buying things, and the more that you have, the more that I'm afraid that I may not have, and then you have this negative competition going on. So there's a lot of effects of this individualistic thinking that we have. So if you look at the logical conclusion, it's an implosion system. Ultimately, it's moving towards implosion, is what it is, because or annihilation of sorts, because we're going to just kind of we will become nothing, just separated individuals all over the place, playing the game, and only few people will ultimately win, because I can't sustain all the things that I'm getting for myself if it's just for me. It gets harder. It's just like a farmer farming 20-acre land all by himself with no help, no family members, nobody else in there working with this person, because I say I want to hoard all the money to myself. I don't want to pay anybody else, so I'm going to do it all alone. And so this individualism kind of promotes that type of thing. What I'm saying the solution would be is that I also understand, by the way, because I know many economists would tell you that capitalism is probably been one of the best way to have individual freedom, which on the reverse side, if you don't have capitalism, or a system of individualism, it might be a system where it's oppressive and just trying to force people together type thing. So there has to be some type of a balance. And what I'm thinking the solution should be is that we question our own beliefs, the beliefs of individualism, the beliefs of even community. What do we mean by this? And what really matters, what works best? Some level of individualism and some level of community building. There has to be some balance between both. It can't just be one or the other, because the extreme of either could actually become negative. So
Yeah, so I said, yeah, very interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think just bringing it back down to waste and sort of the themes of the podcast that we had previously. That individualistic viewpoint sort of creates it seems to create a sort of a um an air of inherent waste
Right.
because of um you know the the um the call of autonomy.
Right.
So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I know
It's
we're kind of running out of time for
yeah, we are.
our
Yeah.
episode for today. But yeah, I think this is really cool. So I kind of want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. If you do have any questions or you want, I think one of the things that we want to start doing is encouraging people to ask questions on our social media. So
Nice.
asking questions on Instagram, Facebook. If you if you want us to answer these questions like during the episode about this episode, any previous episodes, and sort of get maybe some of our guests to answer some of these questions as well. Um, but yeah, so if anybody does have any questions, then just make sure to reach out to us on Green Carpet Interviews on Instagram and Facebook, and we can try to answer some of these things and yeah,
Awesome.
might be kind of cool. All right,
Awesome.
guys,
Well, great.
people, guys, girls, they, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Green Carpet Interviews. We hope you found it informative and inspiring.
This show was brought to you by Veg on the Edge, our vegan restaurant in Santa Cruz and San Luis Obispo. If you're in the area, be sure to stop by and check out our delicious plant-based dishes. Check out vegontheedge.com for more information.
To stay connected with us and learn more about conscious living, follow us on Instagram at Green Carpet Interviews. We love hearing from our listeners and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Green Carpet Interviews.